he was the most charismatic, opportunistic, driven human being, and for him to just sort of shy away and back off from life was so uncharacteristic of him.
Uncharacteristic, perhaps, but not unusual among retired players and even active ones. These men contend that depression can be as debilitating as a serious injury, and post-retirement life can be as crushing as a Super Bowl loss.
It remains the looming nightmare over the most popular team spectator sport in America. The realization that many of their past heroes are facing an uncertain future of health and perhaps a shorter road to mortality. Those players and many of their current peers want more action to ensure their brains don't turn to jello after short careers. And they want to know if the National Football League is indeed doing everything it can to avoid a terrible fate. So let's get to it. Welcome back to MidPoint, the man who started the concept of following and dissecting sports business, the sports professor, Rick Horrow. Good day, Professor, and how are we?
We're cold. We're in New York, and it's snowing around us, so we're cold. We don't know why people don't live anywhere but Florida, but that's another question for another day.
Yeah, I cannot give you any sort of sympathy at this point because you, A, have a heater in the vehicle, and B, you don't have to be there. There are airplanes, but that's just another story.
No, unusually good point from you.
Thank you very much. I try to get at least one a day. Let's go ahead and turn to this NFL issue right here now. According to the Sports Business Journal, the NFL is suspending its efforts to track some of these concussive hits using helmet and head sensors. They say it's not really, I guess the data they're getting back is not very reliable. But, Rick, you would have to imagine a lot of players are going to be asking, well, what are you really still doing about it? Because the issue is still there, and there are still players getting injured every single day. They want to know the NFL is serious.
Yeah, and I suspect it's a misrepresentation of what the NFL is actually intending versus doing. The issue is not whether they're going to continue to explore the best ways to track concussions. The issue is this the point in the season or in the evolution of this technology when they should actually use it to determine specifically whether a player should be required to be taken out of the game or not. You know, the medical consultants, whether or not you believe their motives or not, clearly I think they would rather develop more precise and reliable processes than allow early technology to be deployed. Quick scientific efforts ought to move forward, and that's really the issue. How can you follow up from this suspension with some real technical advances that can actually be used?
Is it fair to say, though, Rick, that a lot of the players in the National Football League still feel that Roger Goodell and the league are not doing everything that they can and are still sort of using them as tackling dummies sometimes?
Well, you know, the second part is a little dramatic. I would say that many players still believe that there is a destiny of shorter life and hits that no human being ought to take, but then everybody understands that's a risk that you sign up for when you play the game. I know that's a pretty heartless way to describe it, but if people understand it's a violent game and there is appropriate response for making the game as safe as you can, then I think it's the right answer. That balance will always be questioned on either side of it.
All right, I got about a minute or so left before we take a break, come back and hit FIFA and some other subjects here. But let me say in the NFL Players Union, very powerful union, always has been. Now they're coming out against the Wisconsin right-to-work legislation. This basically goes after Governor Scott Walker, who may be thinking about a presidential run in 2016. Do you think this will have any effect whatsoever on Walker, on his constituency? Because, hey, let's face it, football players getting behind something, fans start to listen.
Well, they do. But on the other hand, Scott Walker has been pro sports in a broad context. Remember, we talked last week about Scott Walker asking for the public-private partnership to keep the Milwaukee Bucks in the state. And so I think this is clearly a labor dispute. And I think at the end of the day, there is going to be ongoing conversation about how you resolve this in a state that's already had some very significant labor issues, as you remember, and the whole teachers issue with Scott Walker and the pension issue. That's one where he's front and center on how he handles it may determine his long-term success as a presidential candidate.
I got about 15 seconds here real quickly. There's a little bit of a PR effort by the NFLPA to kind of sidle up with the fans.
Well, yeah, the NFLPA is always looking for an edge in the court of public opinion, and at the end of the day, we'll see how that all shakes out as far as the fans understanding what the real economic issues are. There's, name me one union that doesn't try to get a PR advantage in any context.
There you go. And that probably is the best way to put it. Hang tight, Rick, because we're going to ask another question. Is there any more political nightmare than the organization that runs World Soccer? Might be the city of Miami. We'll explain when we come back right here on MidPoint.
Mesothelioma victim.
Okay, thinking caps on. Take a few notes. There will be a test. Welcome back to Sports Professor Rick Horrow joins us. Rick, we said we're going to talk about FIFA, but there's some late-breaking news that's coming across right now I wanted to get your take on right away. The Minnesota Vikings running back Adrian Peterson, he has been reinstated. U.S. District Court Judge David Doty ruled in the NFLPA's lawsuit against the NFL on Peterson's behalf. The union, of course, arguing that Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL, acted outside his authority in November when he suspended Peterson. The judge has apparently agreed, so Adrian Peterson is back. Your immediate reaction, first of all?
Immediate reaction, without knowing all of the facts of the ruling, because I haven't seen it, is that this is one of those issues where that judge has been involved in process more than anything else. And it's, again, one of those functions of life before the proactive labor policy and life after it. I think Roger Goodell has done a good job of understanding that before the policy was in place, it was like the Wild West. So anything that happens before the new policy was in place, it may be different kinds of punishments and different kinds of structures. I think in the future, Adrian Peterson is clearly a voice of the Vikings. They've got a new stadium going. They're getting a Super Bowl done. So we'll have to see how he uses this as an opportunity to resuscitate in Minnesota. But I think the whole idea of a policy that's done will be a guide to future actions. This was basically an incident that happened before the policy was in place.
I think that's also a good point here because, in your opinion, is it possible that a decision like this will erode what basically is the job of a commissioner of any sport if you have certain rules, regulations, and authorities that you are given, players decide and agree that they're going to play by it? It would seem as if now this is the courts getting involved and can really change what a commissioner can do in any sport.
If the courts got involved and there was no policy or said this was haphazard and they didn't act to create one, I would say, yeah, there's really a reduction of power. I think everybody understands the biggest issue here with the NFL is that everything was done proactively and not with the appropriate planning at the beginning of last season. And I think because of that and the impact of the new policy and when it was in place, and we've had a Super Bowl that focused on Katy Perry and not Anthony Peterson or Adrian Peterson. I think we have an opportunity now to move forward. But I guess we'll just have to see. And you need to ask me next week after I read this.
Exactly. Well, it just did happen here in the last couple of minutes here, so I wanted your immediate reaction. We will follow it up again next week. A minute or so left here. I mentioned FIFA a little bit. FIFA's decided, of course, now that the World Cup is going to move to winter. Is this not just another chaotic effort, a chaotic attempt by FIFA to basically try and repair a monstrous bungle on their part?
Well, it's a chaotic attempt to try to minimize the damage of understanding that they forgot to read the memo that says that the average temperature in Qatar in the summer is 120 degrees. And so when the World Cup authorizing or organizing committee of Qatar went in and said, we'll write you a check, that's great. But to play these games in the winter means that it's going to shake up all aspects of international soccer, the league championship schedules, the player development processes, the international friendlies. And that's just a start.
By the way, about a minute or so left here then. David Beckham was trying to bring an MLS team to Miami. That doesn't look like it's going to happen, or at least it's a little bit on life support right now. Is this an example of somebody who's been an athlete and he all of a sudden gets involved in the politics and graft and a lot of the underhanded dealings of a city here and really wasn't aware what he was going to get involved in?
Well, you know that I was involved in the politics of Miami for 9 million years. I'm not sure of the graft and underhanded dealings, but I do know that an athlete stepping up and just saying, I'm going to get a stadium done, I don't care what city it is, you need a lot more than that, especially in Miami. It's a lot more difficult as well. But athletes as equity partners who are business guys have made it work. Magic Johnson with the Dodgers, just to name one. So it can work, but as you and I both know, we have seen nothing like Miami.
When the county commissioners say go ahead and talk about a stadium and then they come back and they say, okay, let's vote the stadium down, All I can say is welcome to Miami. To you, I will say welcome to South Florida when you get back on the plane and head back from New York so you can be warm again, Professor. We certainly hope that'll happen soon. I appreciate your time. Try to get warm, and we'll see you again next week.
Adios.
All right, buddy. Take care. All right, with everything else to be concerned about over security here at home, what to make of the latest issue, the unmanned version that can be watching you at this very moment, or maybe part of a plan to do something much more dangerous than just watching? We'll explain after this.